I am John, and we have Violetta with us. There is a beautiful session we're going to start on The Guardian. For those of you who have just joined, welcome. Please check out all of our sessions on The Guardian online on Clearwater Baha'is. Now, a quick introduction. Violetta is an artist and graphic designer living in Pointe-Noire in the Republic of Congo. And she is the co-founder with Adib Musumian of the Utterance Project. Violetta is also a researcher, a writer, and a presenter on Baha'i history. She has given over 50 talks on the Clearwater Baha'is YouTube channel and is the author of 4 online illustrated chronologies of the lives of Baha'u'llah, the Bab, Abdu'l-Bahá, and Shoghi Effendi. All links and details can be found in the description below the video. So without much further ado, welcome, Violetta. We're so happy to have you on this next part on the series on The Guardian.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. I'm going to be saying this a lot during this series that's going to last until July 28th. And you can tease me about it in the question and answers. This is my favorite part. I'm going to say this probably 10 times. This is my favorite part. So let me first share my screen, and then I can tell you a few words about why this is my favorite part before we dive in. Now, can I see thumbs up from you video people? Can you see my screen? Ah, wonderful, wonderful. Great. Today, we're going to be talking about The Guardian, Part 4, 1920 to 1921, Shoghi Effendi in Oxford. I love this part of Shoghi Effendi's life. You're going to see him recover in France from exhaustion, from being Abdu'l-Bahá's secretary for 18 months in Haifa, and the fast-paced life he led that just drained all the energy from him, and his grandfather sent him to France. You're going to see him arrive in England and love England, love the English Baha'is, fall in love with Manchester. It's a huge part of his life. It's the only time The Guardian in his entire life will experience a big, united, deepened, enkindled, active Baha'i community. It's an extraordinary part of this section. And of course, you're going to see him as an ardent student, a passionate, motivated, on fire student, and tennis player. So let's get started. This part covers the life of Shoghi Effendi from the age of 23 in 1920 to the age of 24 in 1921. April to July 1920, Shoghi Effendi convalesces in France. From April to July 1920, we find Shoghi Effendi in la maison d'hydrothérapie de convalescence du Parc de Neuilly. I'm going to translate that for you. Oh, sorry. This is not the window that I move. So at last, after a year and a half, time came for Shoghi Effendi too to leave Haifa, like all of his Syrian Protestant college classmates. But he had expended every last ounce of his energy throwing himself into serving Abdu'l-Bahá for almost 2 years, and he was utterly depleted. Abdu'l-Bahá arranged personally for Shoghi Effendi to recover his health at a sanatorium. I want to take a minute and explain to you what a sanatorium is, because it was a huge part of life in society in the 19th and 20th centuries. The term sanatorium is antiquated, and today we would call them specialized hospitals, spas, we would call them retreats, we would call them treatment centers. They had different aims. They were called sanatoriums back then, but now they're specialized and they're split between treatment centers, rehab, and they were staffed with trained medical personnel, and they were dedicated to treating convalescent people, people who suffered from addictions, people who suffered from chronic illnesses, and those like Shoghi Effendi who suffered from exhaustion, which we now in modern parlance call burnout. Most sanatoriums were in beautiful countryside. They had fresh air that was very invigorating. It was a welcome change from the very smoky, very polluted air of all late 19th, early 20th century cities. They had chimneys, they had factories that put out smoke in the air that you would breathe in and would get on your clothes, get in your hair. Trains constantly blew out toxic charcoal smoke everywhere, cars polluted. It's very difficult to imagine. You know, we have zoning now, so factories are not near cities. They're in specialized areas, but at that time, everything was on top of each other, and it was all charcoal smoke pretty much. So the place that Abdu'l-Bahá chose for Shoghi Effendi, this maison d'hydrothérapie and convalescence, is in a suburb of Paris that is very chic called Neuilly. And the name translates literally as Parc de Neuilly, so the Neuilly Park, hydrotherapy and convalescent home. And it was in a very woodsy suburb of northwest of Paris. Shoghi Effendi, because of the very unusual, very uncommon pressures of his one-of-a-kind station and responsibility and service to Abdu'l-Bahá, compounded by the fact that he had a very rare tenderness of heart and a very, very sensitive soul, would suffer from what we today call burnout for the rest of his life and for the rest of his guardianship. He would always work at the very edge of burnout until he became so completely and utterly run down that he was too tired to even sleep. This would be the lifelong reason why the guardian, the future guardian, to recover enough to return to Haifa and be the guardian, Shoghi Effendi had to leave Haifa for Switzerland every year almost. The spring of 1920 was Shoghi Effendi's first encounter with burnout. There would be many, many more. Abdu'l-Bahá, and his immense love for his cherished grandson, had nonetheless let Shoghi Effendi out of his sight, but with extremely strict, explicit instructions. He must undergo treatment. He must recuperate. He was not to open a book during his stay. Abdu'l-Bahá was so thoughtful and caring about Shoghi Effendi's health, he even arranged for Dr. Lutfullah Hakim, future member of the Universal House of Justice, to accompany Shoghi Effendi from the Holy Land to France. 8 May 1920, Shoghi Effendi's letter to Ali Yazdi from Neuilly. I chose to put this picture because it took place, let me just check before I say anything silly. It took place after Shoghi Effendi left Haifa. This, of course, you will recognize this extremely iconic photograph of Abdu'l-Bahá being knighted. Just a quick note, he was not knighted for his humanitarian efforts during the war to bring grain and corn to the people of Akka and Haifa. He was knighted for his service to the British Empire, for feeding the army when the army arrived, liberated Haifa, and they did not have their provision train. It's a common misconception. This happened 11 days before Shoghi Effendi wrote his letter to his friend Ali Yazdi. So 11 days after Shoghi Effendi writes his letter, then Abdu'l-Bahá was knighted 11 days before. In his letter, Shoghi Effendi tells his good friend Ali Yazdi, "I haven't forgotten you, but do you know and realize what crisis I have passed and into what state of health I have fallen? Exclamation mark. For a month, I have stayed and I'm still staying in this maison de convalescence, convalescent home, away from Paris and its clamor, in bed until noon, receiving treatment and following the master's instructions not to open a book during my stay in this place. This is 18 months before Abdu'l-Bahá's ascension. There is absolutely no indication Abdu'l-Bahá is going to die in a year and a half. Shoghi Effendi is so confident in his adored grandfather's health that he tells Ali Yazdi, the master is in splendid health. You imagine the shock he's going to receive. On the 11th of June, 1920, Shoghi Effendi applies for admission at Oxford University. This is a photograph of Shoghi Effendi, radiant and smiling, in his 20s, from the book Blessings Beyond Measure. Shoghi Effendi applied to Oxford as a non-collegiate student. I'm going to explain this when we get to the part about Oxford. I promise. In his letter of application, he stated to Oxford that his aim for attending Oxford was as follows: my sole aim is to perfect my English, to acquire the literary ability to write it well, speak it well, and translate eloquently, correctly and eloquently from Persian and Arabic into English. My aim is to concentrate for 2 years upon this object and to acquire it through the help of a tutor, by attending lectures, by associating with cultured and refined literary circles, and by receiving exercises in phonetics. Absolutely clear in his objectives. We can see the guardian emerging, the characteristics, that confidence that would prompt Ruhiya Khanum to compare Shoghi Effendi to an object perpetually in motion, set on a course and flying through space, kind of like a comet. This is the handwriting of Shoghi Effendi. Just a quick note, there's a fascinating, one of the main sources for the chronology is this extraordinary article by Ali Nakhshavani called The Range and Power of His Pen. It's a series of conferences he gave in Akuto in 2006. And I think in one of the question and answers in these talks, someone asked him if Shoghi Effendi was left-handed or right-handed. Shoghi Effendi was naturally left-handed, but he attended a very strict Jesuit school that forced him to write with his right hand. And so the handwriting you're looking at is the handwriting of a left-handed person writing with his right hand. He was left-handed for everything else, from tennis to anything else, but he was right-handed for writing. This is a letter that Shoghi Effendi wrote on the 28th of June, 1920, to, again, Ali Yazdi, his very best friend. And it is from Blessings Beyond Measure. In this letter, Shoghi Effendi has spent a month in France, and he's on the mend, and he's awaiting instructions from Abdu'l-Bahá on what should be his next course of action. So he tells Ali Yazdi, I'm better and almost fully recovered. I shall wait and see the turn of events before I decide to pass a sojourn with you in Berlin. Now that I have recovered after 3 months regime, is it 3 months? April, May, June. Yes, 3 months regime, hydrotherapy, and electric treatment, I am impatient to plunge again in a valuable, profitable work. At this point, in May, this letter is in May. Oh no, this letter is later than, it's in June. So Shoghi Effendi wasn't really sure what he was going to do. Was he going to go to Oxford? It was a big question mark. The option he outlined to Ali Yazdi were either he would return to Haifa and resume working for Abdu'l-Bahá as his secretary, or he would go to England and study at Oxford for 2 years, Those were basically the two choices. So he was waiting for Abdu'l-Bahá to make the decision. And Ali Yazdi was suffering a lot financially. And so the rest of the letter is really Shoghi Effendi being a very good friend, caring about his financial worries and just being very, very loving and kind. And you can read the whole letter in Blessings Beyond Measure. The parallel between Abdu'l-Bahá and Shoghi Effendi's experiences in France. This is a section that came out of my work on the chronology of Abdu'l-Bahá, the very first chronology I wrote in 2021 on the occasion of the ascension of Abdu'l-Bahá. I was very, very moved and shocked by Abdu'l-Bahā's experiences in Paris. And when I was writing, and I was in the midst of researching for this chronology, I was completely flabbergasted to realize that Shoghi Effendi had the same experience as Abdu'l-Bahá in France and used almost exactly the same words. So this is a photograph of Le Dôme, means the dome. It's an extremely famous, very famous landmark cafe. And if you go to France today, you can still go there. I mean, that's why Paris is such an amazing city. I mean, they have cafes that have been open for 200 years. And it's in Montparnasse, so it's in like the heart of the city on the left bank of the Seine River. So there is a striking similarity in Abdu'l-Bahá and Shoghi Effendi's experiences and their comments about Paris 7 years apart. Abdu'l-Bahá was in Paris in 1913. He's making this comment in 1913. Shoghi Effendi is there 7 years after his grandfather in 1920. Both Abdu'l-Bahá and Shoghi Effendi were profoundly dismayed by the materialism of the people who lived in Paris. These are Abdu'l-Bahā's words about Parisians in 1913. And you must get your hands on this extraordinary book by Jean Jasion, about Abdu'l-Bahá in France in 1911 and in 1913. It is amazing, a must own in your library. You have to own this book. This is Abdu'l-Bahá speaking. The Parisian people are submerged in the sea of materialism. They are intoxicated with the wine of desire and selfish appetites. They think these material objects are permanent. And 7 years later, these are Shoghi Effendi's words, his grandson's words regarding Paris and Parisians. I do not like Paris. People are so superficial, empty, pleasure-seeking, and frivolous. Life bores me here, and I hope I will soon have a change for the better. Ta-da! July 1920, Shoghi Effendi's first week in London. This is the beginning of a beautiful love story between Shoghi Effendi and London and England and Scotland, and the English people and the Scottish people. Loves them until the day he dies in London, in England. 21st to 26th of July, 1920, Shoghi Effendi's arrival in London. I had a little fun with this graphic, my friends. These are the people that you're going to hear about in the story below. There's some Baha'i friends in the first row. Of course, our beloved, our adored, our favorite Englishman, Dr. John E. Esslemont, our favorite English woman, Lady Blomfield, Abdu'l-Bahā's dear, loving, generous, kind, selfless friend, Ethel Rosenberg, Wesley Tudor Pole, dear, dear friend to Abdu'l-Bahá and Shoghi Effendi, Harlan and Grace Ober, they are Americans, and Ziaullah Azharzadeh. I butchered that, I apologize. Below are non-Baha'i contacts that he's going to come in contact this first week in Paris. We have Lord Lamington, Sir Denizen Ross, Professor Kerr, Sir Walter Raleigh, and Professor Margoliouth, who is going to remain in contact with Shoghi Effendi after he becomes the guardian. Shoghi Effendi arrived in London on the 21st of July, 1920, and he was warmly and affectionately welcomed by the many devoted friends of Abdu'l-Bahá in the city, in Lindsay Hall, in Notting Hill Gate, for those of you who are attending here from London. The grandson of their beloved Abdu'l-Bahá is in London with them. Of course, they're going to bend over backwards to welcome him. Dr. John Esslemont was present, as well as Harlan and Grace Ober, two visiting Baha'is. So the next day, on the 22nd of July, Dr. Esslemont calls on Shoghi Effendi at his hotel, and together they go to Miss Grand's home. I couldn't find a picture of Miss Grand. And the Harlan and Grace Ober, the visiting American Baha'is, are there. The day after that, on the 23rd of July, 1920, Dr. Esslemont meets Shoghi Effendi at the home of Ethel Rosenberg, first British Baha'i, and they return again to Miss Grand's home, where they are introduced 17 people to the Baha'i faith. Dr. Esslemont returns to Bournemouth, where he is working and living, and he comes back a few days later on the 26th of July, 1920, and together they pay a visit to Elizabeth Herrick, another Baha'i in London who was planning on organizing a unity feast. Shortly after the 26th of July, 1920, Shoghi Effendi leaves for Oxford. I absolutely adore this picture. There are no words for how much I love this picture. Young Shoghi Effendi in travel gear with his suitcase and his coat, his very handsome Panama hat. I love that hat. Shoghi Effendi arrived in England with tablets from Abdu'l-Bahá, revealed for Lady Blumfield, Lord Lamington, and Major Tudor Pole. He also had instructions and recommendations from Sir Denison Ross and Professor Kerr to a man named Sir Walter Raleigh, a professor and lecturer on English literature at Oxford University, as well as a letter of introduction to Professor Margoliouth, a remarkable Orientalist and scholar of Arabic whom Shoghi Effendi admired greatly. You can already tell London and England were just a remarkable experience for Shoghi Effendi, very stimulating compared to Paris. And he just loved the English Baha'is. So many of them were so utterly devoted to his grandfather, and they remembered him so clearly from his visit just 7 years ago. While Shoghi Effendi was in London, he received a letter back from Professor Margoliouth at Oxford saying that he would do everything in his power to be of assistance to a relative of Abdu'l-Bahá. Very shortly after 26th of July, 1920, Shoghi Effendi left London for Oxford. From the 26th of July to the 10th of September, 1920, Shoghi Effendi's first month in Oxford, because it's the end of July, so just August to September. This is a stunning photograph of Shoghi Effendi with a cardigan at the time he was studying in England. When Shoghi Effendi arrived in Oxford around the 26th of July, 1920, he checked into a hotel called the Randolph Hotel, and he began meeting with professors and searching out a tutor. Although it was still the summer holiday, Shoghi Effendi didn't waste any time. He hit the ground running. He immediately began working with a tutor he found, a professor of philosophy at Balliol College. Sometime in August, Shoghi Effendi met with Lord Lamington. When he arrived, there was no vacancy at Balliol College. I promise I'm going to explain all the college systems of Oxford for you because it's complicated with the non-collegiate delegacy and the Balliol College and all the other colleges. Oxford is a 1,000-year-old university. It has wonderful traditions, and they're a little complicated. So he couldn't register into Balliol College, which is the college he wanted to be admitted into. So even though he wasn't officially admitted into Oxford, he began taking classes and pursuing work with his tutors, and he went to class every day. And he left the Randolph Hotel sometime in that month and rented a room at 45 Broad Street in Oxford. On the 28th of July, 1920, Shoghi Effendi writes a letter to Florence Khan. This is an absolutely stunning picture of these stalwart Baha'is, Florence Khan and Ali Kuli Khan. Oh, the parents of Marzi Gale. This is a photograph from Wikipedia Commons, if you can believe it. A week after arriving in Oxford on the 28th of July, 1920, Shoghi Effendi wrote a letter to Florence Khan, who you see in this picture with her absolutely stunning hat. And it shows how busy he already is, even just a week after having arrived. I have been fearfully busy since I stepped on British soil, and so far, the progress of my work has been admirable. Now, we know Shoghi Effendi and his mastery of words. If he says his progress has been admirable, it means it's been stupendous, phenomenal, superhuman. A normal person couldn't have done what he did in a week, basically. If Shoghi Effendi says it's admirable, much more than that. After arriving in Oxford and settling in the Randolph Hotel, where he was before he moved to Broad Street, Shoghi Effendi spoke to the professors that he had been writing with, spoke to Dr. Margoliouth, and eminent graduates of Oxford, such as Lord Grey, Earl Curzon, Lord Milner, Mr. Asquith, Swinburne, and Sir Herbert Samuel. To one and all, Shoghi Effendi clarified points about the Baha'i faith on which these people were unclear or confused about. And when he's ending his letter to Florence Khan, Shoghi Effendi makes a special, meaningful request. Do pray for me, as I have requested you on the eve of my departure, that in this great intellectual center, I may attain my object and achieve my end. Shoghi Effendi is not really asking Florence Khan to pray for him. He is asking Florence Khan to make him an instrument of service to his beloved grandfather, to serve the faith. That's what he's asking. August to September 1920, so around the same time that all of these other events are happening, we're going to look a little bit more closely at how Shoghi Effendi settles in England his first month on British soil. So on the 8th of August, 1920, Lord Lamington, the very handsome gentleman with the phenomenally beautiful mustache you see here, writes to Abdu'l-Bahá with news of Shoghi Effendi, and he acknowledges the tablet that Abdu'l-Bahá sent him, that Shoghi Effendi delivered. And this is how he addresses Abdu'l-Bahá. My dear friend, I was glad to get your letter at the hands of Shoghi Rabbani and to know from him that you are well. He himself seemed in good health, and I was again impressed by his intelligence and open and honest manner. I hope he will manage to get the training he seeks at Oxford. He came to the House of Lords 2 or 3 days, but none of the occasions were, I fear, of any great interest. It's very touching to see the eagerness of Shoghi Effendi to experience and observe the sessions of the House of Lords and the House of Commons. He, from infancy to the day he died, Shoghi Effendi was insatiably passionate and curious about learning. And he was very interested in parliamentary debate when he was a student at Syrian Protestant College. And you can see that the systems of government is something that he was interested in when he was 14, 15, 17 years old. He's still interested in it when he's 20, 21, 23, 24, and he's going to remain interested in this governance, this how society organizes itself, basically. And you will see this develop throughout the chronology in all the big, long, important watershed event letters that he is going to write to the Baha'i world. Shoghi Effendi and England. This is just a little collage I made of all of the sites of London that Shoghi Effendi spent time in and saw and was familiar with by the time he left London. You know, St. Paul's Cathedral, the House of Commons, the Tower Bridge. What are the other ones? Kew Gardens, where he spent time and he would visit later in his life. During his 18 months in England, Shoghi Effendi forged unforgettable memories that would remain with him for the rest of his life. He became deeply familiar with iconic places in London, such as Westminster Abbey, the House of Commons, the House of Lords, St. Paul's Cathedral, the Tower of London, the British Museum, the National Gallery, the Victoria and Albert Museum, the City, Kew Gardens, and on and on and on. And these associations that he forged with these places during his student days, he would later share on trips to London with his wife, Ruhia Khanum. He would take her to these places that he loved. Sometimes on benches in gardens, he would read to her from his favorite book, The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire by Gibbon. Shoghi Effendi had very, very modest means during his studies in England, and this is a characteristic that is lifelong as well. He was very, very careful with money. He never spent more than he needed to, traveled third class on trains. And he was very careful with his allowance. And he went so far as to purchase an electric iron so that he could press his clothes himself. Despite his modest means, he saw as much of England as he could. From the 10th to the 15th of September, 1920, 5 days with Dr. John Esslemont. I'm going to say this constantly, but this is one of my favorite pictures of Shoghi Effendi. I love it. I love that he has his hand, his chin in his hand. I love the smile on Dr. Esslemont, the hand on Shoghi Effendi's shoulder. You just see the bond, and it's just so wonderful if you just think Dr. John Esslemont in a couple of years is going to become Shoghi Effendi's first real professional English secretary. God, that love that Dr. Esslemont feels for Abdu'l-Bahá and Shoghi Effendi and the reciprocal love they feel for him is one of the most beautiful stories of friendship in our faith. Really, I really believe that. So after these intense few first weeks in Oxford, Shoghi Effendi finally accepts Dr. John E. Esslemont's invitation and goes to visit him in Bournemouth at his private sanatorium for a few days. See, I told you sanatoriums were a big part of society in the early 20th century. And he is a doctor and he runs a sanatorium. The day after, so Dr. John Esslemont, in fact, was the resident medical officer of the home sanatorium for the treatment. So it was a specialized sanatorium for the treatment of tuberculosis. And it is in the beautiful, stunning coastal resort town of Bournemouth on the south coast of England in southeast Dorset. The day after Shoghi Effendi arrives in Bournemouth, his sister Ruhangiz, who is about to begin her studies in Scotland and who will later break the covenant, joins him. And they are both later joined by a Persian Baha'i named Aflatun. Shoghi Effendi's first term at Oxford was beginning in 2 weeks. So all of this yet, and he hasn't actually started his first term in Oxford. The photograph above shows Shoghi Effendi and Dr. Esslemont sitting close to each other on the steps in the front of Dr. Esslemont's sanatorium. And Shoghi Effendi would later recall his lovely visits to Bournemouth in a letter expressing what they meant to him. This is later, years later. I shall ever recall the happy and restful days I spent at Bournemouth in the company of our departed friend, John Esslemont. And I will not forget the pleasant hours we spent together while taking our meals in the sanatorium. October 1920, Shoghi Effendi's first term at Oxford. I know this is a chronology about Shoghi Effendi, but I'm going to break the rules and I'm going to go back 8 years to Shoghi Effendi's grandfather, Abdu'l-Bahá, in Oxford, in the same place Shoghi Effendi is in now. And I'm going to tell you a short little story about that visit because it was tremendous, it was significant, it was incredible. And this is a photograph of New College. Let me just check real quick. I think New College might be where Abdu'l-Bahá gave the speech at Oxford. Anyway, that's probably why that picture's there. So this is where Abdu'l-Bahá spoke. This is, of course, our beloved Abdu'l-Bahá, and this is Thomas Kelly Chain, TK Chain, and his wife, whose name is Elizabeth Gibson. It's phenomenal love story, just a beautiful, beautiful love story. So Abdu'l-Bahá arrived in Oxford on Tuesday, December 31st, 1912. And he went straight to visit this man, TK Chain, and his wife, Elizabeth Gibson. TK Chain was 72 years old, and he was a highly, highly respected English theologian and biblical critic with a doctorate in literature from Oxford University. And he became a Baha'i 5 months before Abdu'l-Bahá's visit. He was one of the most eminent, if not the most eminent scholar, intellectual, to be a Baha'i during that time in 1912. He was the most prominent intellectual to be a Baha'i. But he was suffering from paralysis, and he was dying. He would die very, very soon after Abdu'l-Bahá's visit. And his wife was younger than he was, and she was so loving towards her ailing, suffering husband. She was so kind, so loving. And Abdu'l-Bahá said that she was an angelic woman, an example to all in her unselfish love. And he said, yes, she is a perfect woman, an angel. She was 42 years old and he was 70, and they had a very, very happy marriage. They adored each other, and Abdu'l-Bahá loved the time that he spent with them. And then after spending time with TK Chain and Elizabeth Gibson, TK Chain, despite his progressive paralysis, had organized a big conference for Abdu'l-Bahá to speak at Manchester College later that day at 3 p.m. So it wasn't New College, it was Manchester College where he gave the talk. So Abdu'l-Bahá gave a masterful address at 3 p.m. at Oxford after having spent time with his friend TK Chain. He spoke about the powers of perception, warfare. He asked the audience if the fundamental idea of Christianity had not been completely, entirely forgotten, by saying that the Balkan War was due to the fundamental basis of religion having been set aside. Very interestingly and very weirdly, to be frank, there were absolutely no questions for Abdu'l-Bahá after he finished speaking. But TK Chain would say later about Abdu'l-Bahá, I mean, TK Chain adored Abdu'l-Bahá until the day he died, and he said he was a complete man. No one in our time, so far as my observation reaches, lived the perfect life like Abdu'l-Bahá. TK Chain is a very, very special person. We don't know enough about him. He's really wonderful. From August to October 1920, Shoghi Effendi prepares to matriculate at Oxford. This is just an aerial panorama of Oxford. You see how it's like this little gem nestled in all these rolling country verdant hills. It's very, very beautiful. Shoghi Effendi began studying under a private tutor in August of 1920, 2 months before the start of the first term. And he was not yet admitted at Balliol, and he was living off campus and attending lectures while he was enrolled in St. Catherine's College. St. Catherine's College. So there's the system of colleges that I keep promising you that I'm going to get to, and I will. St. Catherine's College is for the students who are not in another college, the non-collegiate students. On the 5th of October, 1920, Shoghi Effendi writes a letter to Ali Yazdi. This is the inside of probably, gosh, it's the Bodleian Library, the Bod. The Bodleian Library is the main research library of the University of Oxford. I have an amazing picture of it at the end that I'm going to show you, but this is the inside of it. It sprawls over no less than 5 buildings, and it's one of the oldest libraries in Europe. It was opened in the 14th century, and Shoghi Effendi spent many hours in these hallowed halls. This photograph is the interior of the Duke Humphreys Library, the oldest reading room in the Bodleian Library at the University of Oxford. This library houses maps, music, Western manuscripts, theology, and art materials. It is the main reading room for researchers of codicology, bibliography, and local history, and it also houses the university archives and the Conservative Party archives. Ali Yazdi is still having financial difficulties in Germany. He's having a very difficult time. Much of this letter of the 5th of October, 1920 that Shoghi Effendi writes to Ali Yazdi is just his heart breaking by learning from Ali Yazdi how difficult his time is in Germany. And Shoghi Effendi took the initiative to write to his family in Haifa, telling them about Ali Yazdi's situation. And he stated that he really wondered and got even angry at the delay and silence following my letter, which I sent home concerning you. So Ali Yazdi confided in Shoghi Effendi that he was having a hard time. Shoghi Effendi wrote to his family. His family didn't write back soon enough for Shoghi Effendi. Shoghi Effendi always did things immediately. Even if you could do it before immediately, that's when he would do it. And it would be lifelong frustration for him that people didn't function the same way he did. Shoghi Effendi also confides himself in Ali Yazdi in this letter. He says, "Do you believe me when I say that I, the grandson of the master, have been victim of painful experiences, sometimes of bitter disappointments, and always of constant anxieties, all justified for my immediate work and future? If you have spent of late painful and trying times, my share of these troubled hours is by no means much less, and my burden much lighter." So extending to his friend that they're both adults now and they're living difficult lives. They have pressure weighing on their shoulders. They have financial problems. He also talks about his studies and the Herculean task that lies ahead of them, what it is exactly he needs to accomplish. I mean, Shoghi Effendi is feeling the pressure. He has 2 years to completely, utterly, totally, fully master the English language, the language of Shakespeare. He has to master that entire language, a language that contains twice as many words as the French language, almost 70,000 words. This is what he says to Ali Yazdi. "My field of study is so vast. I have to acquire, master, and digest so many facts, courses, and books, all essential, all indispensable to my future career in the cause. The very extent of this immense field is enough to discourage, excite, and overwhelm such a young and inexperienced beginner as myself. Think of the vast field of economics, social conditions and problems, the various religions of the past, their histories and principles and their force, the acquisition of a sound and literary ability in English to be served for translation purposes, mastery of public speaking, so essential to me, all these and a dozen more, all to be sought, acquired, and digested." He calls himself a beginner. So he is at the beginning of his studies, and he has 2 years. It's going to be cut short because of Abdu'l-Bahá's passing. He's not even going to be in Oxford for 2 years. He's going to be there for 1.5 years. And in that time, he managed to master all of those fields and a dozen more. The last line of the letter reads like the motto of the future guardian of the cause of Baha'u'llah, and this is it: prayer, faith, perseverance, and effort will alone do it. Between the 16th of October and December 1920, Shoghi Effendi's Michaelmas term. Michaelmas is the Oxford name for the first term of the year at Oxford. Still in the non-collegiate delegacy, this is a photograph of the very world-famous Great Quadrangle in front of the 1,000-year-old Christ Church in Oxford. So this first term of classes, Shoghi Effendi took political science, social and political problems, social and industrial questions, political economy. I took that in college. It's horrible. English, economic history since 1668, logic. I took that too. It's a very, very hard course. The Eastern question and relations of capital and labor. All intense classes. And in addition to this, Shoghi Effendi is helping Dr. Esslemont translate Persian words, the Persian hidden words. And using all his spare time to translate the Tablet of Visitation of Baha'u'llah and other prayers. So I want to just introduce you to the terms of Oxford, because they all have cutesy names. So Shoghi Effendi is going to have 4 terms at Oxford. In 1920, between October and December, the first term, Michaelmas term. Between January and March is the Hilary term, the second term. Between April and June 1921 is the Trinity term. And so there are 3 terms in the year: Michaelmas, Hilary, Trinity, first, second, third. And then the second year he was supposed to start, he was supposed to also do Michaelmas, Trinity, Hilary, and Trinity. But he only did Michaelmas because he left in November. He never even finished in December because of the ascension of Abdu'l-Bahá. So the Michaelmas term is the first term of the academic year, and it comes from the Feast of St. Michael and All Angels, which falls on the 29th of September. Hilary is called Hilary because it comes from the feast day of St. Hilary de Poitiers, which falls close to the start of the term. And Trinity is the name of the third term, called Trinity because of Trinity Sunday, which falls 8 weeks after Easter in May or June. So the next photograph here is just a photograph. And this is a photograph that I was given permission to use by George Ronald. Thank you, George Ronald. From the University of Oxford. The first certificate of matriculation of Shoghi Effendi. He actually enters Oxford as a student in a college and not in non-collegiate. The handwriting is very fancy, so I'll tell you what it says. It just says University of Oxford, Scholares non iscripti, Latin for schools not registered. Mr. Shoghi Rabbani, you notice that he's not spelling it Shoghi yet, but it's the diacriticals are there for Rabbani. Mr. Shoghi Rabbani entered matriculation as a non-collegiate student 23rd of October 1920 and has kept by residence 1 term, Michaelmas 1920. His name has been on the books of the students' delegacy for 1 term. He is of good character and has the permission of the delegates to migrate to Balliol College, 15 January 1921. 3rd to 4th November 1920. Ali Yazdi, Shoghi Effendi's good friend, comes from Germany to England, visits Shoghi Effendi for 1 day, and he's on his way to America, where his destiny awaits. 3rd of November, 1920, Shoghi Effendi invites Ali Yazdi to Oxford. This is a photograph of James Bryce, the first Viscount Bryce. He comes up in the story. It'll make sense. Around mid to late October 1920, Ali Yazdi left Germany for the United Kingdom, on his way to the United States to enroll at the UC Berkeley, University of California at Berkeley. And he wired Shoghi Effendi, we're in the same country again. And Shoghi Effendi immediately invited him to come. And he said, you do not mean to tell me you are going to America without coming to see me. So Shoghi Effendi and Ali Yazdi spend one day in Oxford between the 3rd and the 4th of November, 1920. Shoghi Effendi's motto, according to Ali Yazdi, was what the master would say. And I just have a particular affection for this photograph. That's a colorized photograph of Abdu'l-Bahá. It's not a color photograph. It was manually colorized from black and white. So he spent the day of the 3rd of November, spent the night of the 3rd of November, and left on the 4th of November, 1920. And he stayed in Shoghi Effendi's room. Shoghi Effendi gave Ali Yazdi a full tour of Oxford, and they were just best friends again, like they had been when they were 11 and 13 years old in Ramleh, Egypt. They talked about the future of the faith, and they talked about Abdu'l-Bahá, and Shoghi Effendi said, I just yearn to return to Haifa and serve Abdu'l-Bahá. And for Shoghi Effendi, his entire life, according to Ali Yazdi, his entire life could be distilled in these 5 words: what the master would say. Abdu'l-Bahá also wrote a letter of introduction to the Baha'is in America for Ali Yazdi when he left for America, just the same way he had done when Ali Yazdi left for Germany. Yep. I'm going to skip this story and this one because I see the time is going by and I still have to cover a lot. You can go to the chronology and at your pleasure read all of these letters back and forth between Shoghi Effendi and Ali Yazdi. December 1920 to January 1921, Scotland and Balliol. I'm getting to the college system, I swear. December 1920, winter break, visiting Mrs. White in Scotland. This is the photograph of Edinburgh, famous. It's a dazzling picture of Edinburgh's Castle Rock. So this is where Shoghi Effendi spent his winter break after his first term at Balliol, before Balliol. His first term as a non-matriculated student. He went to visit his sister Rohangi's, who's studying in Scotland, and visit the place that Abdu'l-Bahá had absolutely loved Scotland. When Abdu'l-Bahá went to visit Scotland 7 years before Shoghi Effendi went there, there were a handful of Baha'is, I think maybe less than 10. And if you go to the chronology or to the YouTube video on Clearwater YouTube channel, you can experience Abdu'l-Bahá's visit to Edinburgh is extremely packed, extremely meaningful. He was deeply, deeply happy with his visit to Edinburgh. And now his grandson is going to visit, and he will visit until the last year of his life. He will visit Edinburgh. He will go back there with Ruhiya Hanum twice. And now Balliol College. Ta-da-da-da-da. This is what I've been promising you. This is the inside of the dining hall at Balliol College. So Oxford's academic structure is worth taking a look at and is worth to spend a couple minutes trying to understand it, because this was Shoghi Effendi's life for a year and a half. In 1920, there was no university ranking system like we have now. You can go, what's the best university for English? What's the best university for history or mechanical engineering? In 1920, there was no diversity of like eminent universities like we have now. Now we have, of course, Harvard, but we also have Princeton, Yale, MIT, we have La Sorbonne, we have like Stanford, UC Berkeley. Back then, it was essentially the two best universities in the world were essentially Oxford and Cambridge. That was it. Oxford has a system of colleges, and the system of colleges of Oxford is unique in the entire world. The university has 43 colleges. It only had 38 at the time that Shoghi Effendi attended. And each one of the colleges is a small, multidisciplinary community with its own students, its own academic and administrative staff, its own accommodations, its own library, its own cafeteria, its own special social events, its own sports, and its very own distinctive character and history. And each college is governed by a charter, by an elected head of house, and by a governing body of fellows. This is very ancient. This is a 9-century-old university. I mean, and you can eventually kind of think of Oxford as like 43 different universities under a single university. So Balliol College was kind of like a mini university. That's the one that Shoghi Effendi wanted to attend. These Oxford colleges, including Balliol, they provided students with support and facilities, membership, like a code of honor, like an identity, like almost kind of like patriotism in a way. The bonds between the students in the same college were very, very deep. They were very intimate. They lived, studied, ate, played, and debated and discussed together. It was very friendly. And when you joined a college, it was like getting an immediate community of friends that would be devoted to you and would have your back. Shoghi Effendi was admitted into Balliol College in January 1921 after the winter break following his first non-collegiate term. See, now you understand the non-collegiate term in St. Catherine's was basically, there's no bond. They're all non-collegiate. None of the students attending St. Catherine's are in one of these very friendly, very close, very unique, very bonded colleges. And so Shoghi Effendi's life is going to completely change in January 1921 when he enters Balliol. And Balliol is actually, it's such a, what's the word I'm looking for? Prestigious college. It's one of the most prestigious, one of the oldest, one of the largest, and one of the most centrally located of all of the colleges in Oxford. It was founded in 1263. 8 centuries before Shoghi Effendi is admitted into it. It was founded in 1263 by John I de Balliol. It is the oldest college in the English-speaking world, and its members boast 12 Nobel Prize laureates. That is what we're going to talk about next. January 1921, Shoghi Effendi's second term at Oxford. January to March. This is the Hillary term. This is this very, very, very famous photograph of this. I'm going to show you this like this. This is the class of 1920 Balliol College, Oxford. And this is Shoghi Effendi. So in this picture, he is right here. Can you see my mouse? Somebody, can you give me a thumbs up? You see my mouse? Yeah, okay, cool. So this is Shoghi Effendi right here next to the man with the fancy striped tie. And this is a close-up. I'm going to kind of do both here. There you go. So Shoghi Effendi wore the traditional mandatory black gown of an Oxford student. He would walk across the quad to go to his studies. He was so busy with his studies that he was only free on Sundays. Sunday was his only free day. And his hobbies were to participate in the debating society, play football and tennis. And he was very intensely focused on his two aims, to like learn English perfectly and to use it to translate and to really master the English language. And in February of 1921, Shoghi Effendi gave an address to the Oxford University Asiatic Society on the principles and the history of the Baha'i faith. So between the 27th of March and April 1921, Shoghi Effendi in Scotland and Sussex. I don't know exactly where this photograph was taken. That information is not available, but this is Shoghi Effendi at the time he was studying in Oxford. It's a picture of him in England. And wow, I don't see a mustache. He's maybe one of the only pictures of Shoghi Effendi where he's clean shaven. It's kind of incredible. Shoghi Effendi traveled to Scotland again to visit his sister. He spent time playing tennis in Sussex and Bournemouth with Dr. John Esslemont, and he continued translating prayers and tablets during his vacation. What he really liked when he was in Devon, actually, this is a very nice detail. I love this because I also love this. Shoghi Effendi would always remember from his time in Devon the thick slices of brown bread, raspberry jam, and Devonshire cream. He has such good taste in everything. April 1921, Shoghi Effendi's third term at Oxford. So if you're following, this is the Trinity term. This is his second to last term. After this term, he has the Michaelmas term. And then after that term, he leaves England because of Abdu'l-Bahá's ascension. This is a photograph of Professor Reynold Nicholson, a professor of Arabic at Cambridge. He was well known for his translation of Rumi into English, and he was the tutor of Shoghi Effendi. That was a very short story. 5 May 1921, a paper on economic problems and solutions. This is the inside of the debate chamber of the Oxford Union Society, a place where Shoghi Effendi spent a lot of time during his studies. He loved to attend talks by eminent speakers, attended as many as he could. And he also gave lectures. And an Indian Baha'i living in England said that on Wednesday evening, I went to attend the usual Baha'i meeting at Lindsay Hall. This is in London now. This is not in Oxford. And Mr. Shoghi Rabbani read a paper dealing with the economic problems and their solution. His paper was beautifully worded, and it was very good. So June 1921, July, August, September, October, November. We are 5 months away from the passing of Abdu'l-Bahá. June 1921 is Shoghi Effendi's last summer in England. This is his last summer vacation. From June to October. This is a photograph of a view of the East Cliff in Bournemouth, where Dr. Esslemont is living and where Shoghi Effendi has visited several. This is his third or fourth visit to Bournemouth. And at first, Shoghi Effendi was studying during his summer vacation, but then Abdu'l-Bahá sent strict instructions for him to stop studying, and Shoghi Effendi immediately obeyed and traveled for 2 weeks in Bournemouth. And his sister Ruhangi's also met him in London in September. And then Shoghi Effendi spent a few weeks in Torquay, and this is very, very important, and I'm going to tell you why. These cliffs are bright red. They are brick red. This is Babbacombe Downs in Torquay, a very famous resort on the south coast of England. And the walk through these hills, you walk on a red brick path, red dirt brick path, and then the lawns are bright green on the sides. Does that remind you of anything at the Baha'i World Center? That's where the idea came from. Babbacombe Downs, Torquay. Shoghi Effendi spent 2 weeks in Torquay. He was so his artistic sensitivities were so impressed by the beauty of the green grass and the red path that is why the World Center looks the way it is, because of a summer vacation Shoghi Effendi spent there. And now we come to an extremely important part of this talk, very super important. This is Shoghi Effendi in Manchester. Part 1, he's going to be in Manchester. Let me just look here real quick. He's going to be in Manchester from the 1st of October to the 6th of October. So I broke it up into 2 different sections. Part 1 is just 1 to 3 October. Part 2 is 4 to 6 October. Shoghi Effendi never traveled farther east than Beirut. He never traveled farther north than Scotland. He never traveled further west than Bournemouth. But he crossed Africa from Cape Town to Cairo, from South Africa to Egypt twice. That's my continent. That's why we're blessed. I'm saying this to explain to you that in all of these travels, he never met Baha'is. So all of those 2 trips through Africa, there were 0 Baha'is in Central Africa when he traveled in 1940 and in 1929. Shoghi Effendi was the first Baha'i to cross, I think, Zimbabwe, Zambia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Tanzania, Uganda, not Sudan. He was the first Baha'i to cross all these countries in 1921 and in 1940. He loved the Baha'i community of London, but there is something very special about his visit to Manchester, and you're going to understand very, very quickly. This is, I believe, now, in the question and answer sessions, I would welcome to be contradicted on this, but I believe this is the only experience in the beloved guardian's entire life where he is inside a local Baha'i community for 6 days, where he is constantly surrounded by them, and not only Baha'is, enkindled Baha'is, newly declared Baha'is, passionate Baha'is, Persian Baha'is, English Baha'is, Jewish Baha'is. And his letters to Abdu'l-Bahá are so passionate. I'm just going to jump right in. October 1st, Shoghi Effendi's arrival in Manchester. And this is the photograph of Shoghi Effendi in Manchester. Also, permission was given to me by George Ronald to publish this photograph. Shoghi Effendi is right here. And these are the Baha'is that he is visiting. The community of Manchester was 30 Baha'i strong, and it was one of the oldest in England and also one of the most active and very devoted. Dr. John Esslemont visited Manchester in August 1921 to stay with Baha'is for a few days and visit them, and he told them that Shoghi Effendi was going to come and visit. So now we understand a little better, why did Shoghi Effendi go to Manchester? Because it's a lot of Baha'is at the time. 30 Baha'is, that's a big community. I mean, it's a big community today, 30 Baha'is. But at the time, it must have been a huge community. It's one of the oldest, and it's one of the most devoted. No wonder Abdu'l-Bahá's grandson is going to go visit them to encourage them. So on the evening of Saturday, October 1st, the Baha'is of Manchester gather in a basement room off Mosley Street offices of Jacob Joseph, a very successful Persian real estate agent of distinguished Jewish background from the very well-known Motahede family, all eagerly awaiting Shoghi Effendi's arrival, right before he's starting his Michaelmas term, his last term at Oxford. When Shoghi Effendi walks in the room, he makes everyone feel perfectly at ease. Edward Hall, one of the veteran Baha'is of Manchester, gave a charming description of the 24-year-old Shoghi Effendi, who is going to become the guardian of the cause in 2 months. His eyes were bright. His voice was reassuring. His manners were perfect. His features beautiful. He was as one who, having control of himself, would therefore be able to control others. He commanded respect without seeming to know it. His youthfulness attracted us, and the brightness of his thoughts called out our admiration. We all became happy and led him to the principal chair. Oh, I love Shoghi Effendi. Same night, Shoghi Effendi is going to write a little note in the guest book. He's going to read a prayer and just be very, very loving. That's not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about this woman. This woman is Nora Crossley. She has been a Baha'i for 3 months. Her father died, and her mother is a devout Irish Catholic. And because she became a Baha'i, she is now estranged from her only relative. The night that Shoghi Effendi arrives in Manchester, he describes to the 30 Baha'is how pleased Abdu'l-Bahá was that Nora Crossley. Okay, let me just set the stage for this, because this is I'm going to try to get through this without crying. Look at her hair. Her hair is a bob. It's short. Okay. So once the Baha'is are seated, Shoghi Effendi shares with the Baha'is of Manchester a tablet that Abdu'l-Bahá revealed for the Baha'is of Najafabad in Persia, in which the master speaks about Nora Crossley's exquisite sacrifice, too poor to contribute money towards the construction of the house of worship in Wilmette. She donated her hair. I didn't manage to get through this without crying. You just forgive me. But can you imagine the emotion that must have been in that room in Manchester on the 1st of October, 1921, when Shoghi Effendi, the grandson of Abdu'l-Bahá, is sitting in the chair next to Nora Crossley, speaking about her sacrifice of giving her hair because she has no money, because she became a Baha'i and everyone rejected her. She has no one. It's like the stone for the foundation stone. Neti Tobit was too poor to contribute. This is what makes the Baha'i faith extraordinary. These stories of humility and kindness and just the gentleness of Shoghi Effendi. Oh, you know what? Shoghi Effendi was so moved by Abdu'l-Bahá's words in his tablet and the sweetness of his expressions that tears streamed from his face as he was chanting, and the Manchester Baha'is were deeply moved by the experience. All right, this is not good. October 2nd, 1921. This is the next day that he is in Manchester. Shoghi Effendi speaks about Lua Getzinger. On the evening of Sunday, October 2nd, 1921, Shoghi Effendi listened intently to the Baha'is singing hymns. And then he related to them a very moving story about one of Lua's many pilgrimages to the Holy Land. Shoghi Effendi told the Baha'is in Manchester that on one of her several extended pilgrimages, Abdu'l-Bahá asked Lua Getzinger to step out onto the roof terrace of his house in Haifa in the cool, fragrant night and sing the hymn, the Christian hymn he loved the most, "Nearer, my God, to thee." Lua's voice would rise and fall like a nightingale's while they stood facing Bahji, lying across the plain, and her singing, and the joy of Abdu'l-Bahá was so evident as he wept, tears streaming down his blessed face. October 2nd, so still the second day, Shoghi Effendi writes a letter to Abdu'l-Bahá from Manchester. And this is a photograph from the Library of Congress. It's a general view of Manchester from 1905. So, 15 years, 16 years before. Shoghi Effendi says that the Baha'is of Manchester's radiance has no peer except among the friends in Iran. He describes in detail the services of Baha'is, this is a very long letter. I'm going to skip over it. Talks about the spiritual father of the community called Mr. Edward Hall. He talks about all the different Persians who live there, what they do, what they work. And I just want to share with you the most important part of the letter. This is what Shoghi Effendi says to Abdu'l-Bahá. It's a report. He writes a report to his grandfather about Manchester. Truthfully, I never imagined that there were such souls in this city. Excuse me. I can't read. The tears are blocking my view. Truthfully, I never imagined that there were such souls in this city. The center of the cause is really Manchester, not London. They are thirsty for news of the progress of the cause and have such an attachment to the person of Abdu'l-Bahá. They are truly worthy and deserving. Meeting with these friends brings such spiritual warmth I cannot describe. What steadfastness, what certitude. They are confident as a mountain that this cause will spread worldwide. The actions and efforts of these friends are beyond words. I was so moved by meeting these true servants of the Blessed Beauty that I could not sleep comfortably last night until the morning arrived and I penned this supplication to describe them. I just would ask you to excuse me for a minute. I'm sorry. Okay, so the third day in Manchester, a very spiritual evening. The Baha'is gather again, and Shoghi Effendi brings a gift of several bunches of purple grapes. He chants a prayer for the Baha'is. There's 23 people there. And then he recounts the spirit of Baha'i gatherings in Haifa, in Persia. He gives the Manchester friends a glimpse of communities that are like-minded to them and as devoted and deeply spiritual as them. After a while, Shoghi Effendi stood up and showed the friends a small bottle of attar of rose, which the greatest holy leaf, Abdu'l-Bahā's younger sister had given him. So attar of rose is what you smell when you walk over the threshold of the shrine of Baha'u'llah, Abdu'l-Bahá, and the Bab. It's millions of thousands of petals of rose that are slowly boiled. And the vapor from the roses gathers the scent and the fragrance of the rose, and it's condensed in a series of tubes until the essence of thousands of rose petals is contained in a drop. And one drop of attar of rose, which is what they do in the Holy Land, they put a drop on the entrance. So as you walk, it's just right by your nose. You just put a drop and it just perfumes the entire thing for the whole day. It's very, 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 it's an essential oil, and it's kind of the scent of holiness. And it's a very Baha'i cultural thing, this attar of rose. And in the history of the faith, I can think of 10 stories in my chronologies that I've feature attar of rose, so essential oil of rose. So Shoghi Effendi has this attar of rose that's very, very precious, because in the Holy Family, so the family of Abdu'l-Bahá, the family of the Greatest Holy Leaf, they would order this essential oil to come from Persia. And I imagine it would come from the best of places. And they would get it delivered in the Holy Land. And then she gave a little vial of this to Shoghi Effendi, and Shoghi Effendi must have carried it with him from the Holy Land until England. And so he has this vial that is from the Greatest Holy Leaf, probably from Iran, and he stands up and he anoints the Baha'is, which means he takes a drop of attar of rose from the bottle and he anoints them on their forehead. And this is something that Abdu'l-Bahá himself did a few nights before his declaration in the Garden of Rizwan in the 21st of April, 1963. He felt the spirituality of a gathering that was so powerful that he rose from his room. He crossed the most great house, and he arrived at this gathering where Abdu'l-Bahá, who was 19 years old, was standing there and said, "I felt your spirituality." And he had brought with him a vial of attar of rose, and he anointed personally the supreme manifestation of God of all time, anointed every person there. And then they left. And Shoghi Effendi, 60 years later, does the same thing. He anoints every person in the room at a moment that is the most spiritual moment of their gathering. And then he passed the vial around the room, and everybody put a drop of attar of rose on their hand and then rubbed them together. And they rubbed them together and then rubbed it on their face. So the whole room must have smelt like roses. Friends, I am going to summarize this section because I still have 3 or 4 sections left to cover, and I do not want to keep you here very late. The Manchester Baha'is wrote a letter to Abdu'l-Bahá. And I'm just going to read this one passage. Oh, our dear Lord and loving Master, at this moment when we are full of joy that we have attained to this meeting with thy richly illuminated, beautiful and radiant grandson, Shoghi Effendi, and have become re-inspired and reinvigorated by the pure flame of his love and his message to us. So lovely. So, So the last 2 days of Shoghi Effendi's visit to Manchester, let me see if I can get this image to load if I refresh the page. Okay, well, I'm just going to switch windows. It's not showing on this other screen. Sorry, guys. Just give me a minute. Okay. So this is the linotype factory. This is the factory that Shoghi Effendi visits while he's in Manchester. One of the Baha'is, John Craven, works in this factory. Linotype machines totally revolutionized the printing business. They allowed newspapers to mold an entire line of type instead of having to place the individual NEWS manually to do news. They could type out a whole line. Like in the news today, the British factory workers have gone on strike in Leeds. You know, they could have that whole line placed instead of having to individually, manually place the letters. And so Shoghi Effendi visited a linotype factory on the 5th of October. Then on the 10th of October, Shoghi Effendi writes to Edward Hall. Edward Hall is here. Shoghi Effendi is here. Edward Hall is holding the portrait of Abdu'l-Bahá. Shoghi Effendi absolutely loved his 5 days in Manchester, and he even says to Edward Hall, the sweet perfume of the friends in Manchester has clung to us wherever we have gone, and I find myself again in the cold and academic atmosphere of Oxford. My thoughts go back to the sweet hours I spent in your midst. Then 8 days later, Abdu'l-Bahá writes a letter to the Baha'is of Manchester. And it's very interesting. He responds to their supplication, which they wrote when Shoghi Effendi was there. And he ends his tablet to the Baha'is of Manchester, saying, the way that your letter made me filled with joy and gladness, and I praise God that you are spiritual. And so he gives them advice on what to pray for. But then at the end of the letter, it says, very interesting, it is incumbent upon you, however, to act with the utmost discretion and not rend the veil asunder, for the enemy, though he be not near or afar, lieth in wait and stirreth the negligent to arise against his holiness Baha'u'llah. Be ye prudent, be ye discreet. You might think, well, why? Why is Abdu'l-Bahá saying this? Well, you must remember, Abdu'l-Bahá is going to, the ascension of Abdu'l-Bahá is going to take place 1 month after this. And the covenant breakers are going to arise all over the world. They're going to arise in England. They're going to arise in America. They're going to arise in Persia. They're going to rise in Egypt. They're going to rise in Syria. They're going to rise in Turkey. They're going to rise in the Holy Land. So I think it's important to remember that. He is telling them, yes, you are steadfast. Yes, you are spiritual. Be careful. The enemy lies in wait. I love George Ronald. Can I just say that? This is another picture they allowed me to use in the chronology. This is the very successful, very spiritual, very devoted Joseph brothers, Jacob, Jeff, and Albert, and Shoghi Effendi, and from the Motahede family. And Shoghi Effendi reveals a tablet for Jacob Joseph, and he calls him, stand, O ye that stand fast and firm in the covenant, the faithful servant of the ever-blessed beauty Shoghi Effendi hath written a letter and therein praised you highly. Namely, that these blessed souls, these three Jacob brothers, they look so amazing. I want to hang out with them. Oh, that their candles burn brightly, they are self-sacrificing. Such praise as this has indeed caused the greatest pleasure. Friends, we are arriving at the end. October 1921, Shoghi Effendi's last term at Oxford. October to December, Shoghi Effendi's Michaelmas, first term at Oxford, his second year there. The plan was to go through that entire year and then return to the Holy Land to serve Abdu'l-Bahá. This is an aerial view of Oxford and its many quads. The quads are these green areas that you see here. This is the Bodleian Library, this round building here, one of the 5 buildings of the Bodleian Library. We don't exactly know when, during his studies in Oxford, Shoghi Effendi discovered the book that would have the most major stylistic influence on his English. The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, the masterpiece of Edward Gibbons. But he did, and he would carry an everyman's version of this book, which means a smaller version because it was like, I don't know how many volumes. It is a lot of volumes. When Shoghi Effendi died on the 4th of November, 1957, a copy of this book was on his bedside table. That is how much that book affected The Guardian. That is how much he loved it. So many of Shoghi Effendi's friends and classmates would later remember Shoghi Effendi sitting in the garden quad, one of these green quads, or walking around on summer evenings reading this book, The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. It's like a 16th century book, 17th century. He was so taken by the majestic and elegant style. He just read it aloud, and all his life, Shoghi Effendi's studies had been so hard for him. He was never really happy in any educational institution he attended. He thought he had good memories of Oxford, but they were not all positive. Shoghi Effendi stated in several of his letters to his friends during his time at Oxford that he had been very lonely and very depressed. You know, even though he is playing tennis and he's playing soccer, football, and he's reading and he's stimulated and he's going to all these talks and he's visiting Edinburgh and visiting Sussex, and still. Now, I know there could have been many reasons for him to be lonely and depressed, but I'm just going to offer you one humble take, is that Shoghi Effendi would always be depressed if he was away from the pull of Abdu'l-Bahá, outside of Abdu'l-Bahā's magnetic pull, outside of his atmosphere, outside of his bubble. If he was in England and Syria and Egypt, and then after Abdu'l-Bahā's passing, whenever he was not in the same space as Abdu'l-Bahá, that's how much he loved him. That's just what I think. I don't know. Ali Yazdi was in California now, and Shoghi Effendi was in Oxford. And in late 1920, early 1921, we don't exactly know when, Abdu'l-Bahá wrote a tablet to Ali Yazdi and said, "Render thanks unto God that in this blessed age thou hast stepped forth in the world of existence, been nursed from the breast of the love of God, and been reared in the bosom of divine guidance." It's just a tablet that he wrote to Shoghi Effendi's friend. By November 1921, Shoghi Effendi had succeeded in his studies. This is a map of Oxford from 1605. It was a city with a wall, and Balliol College is already indicated on the map, of course, because it was founded in 1263. Shoghi Effendi's stay in Oxford wasn't very long, but it was very, 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 very successful, immensely successful. The rarefied atmosphere of academic excellence that he bathed in for 18 months, he just absorbed it. And Abdu'l-Bahá says that atmosphere, academic excellence, shaped and sharpened his already clear and logical mind, heightened his critical faculties, reinforced his strong sense of justice and reasoning powers, and added to the Oriental nobility which characterized Baha'u'llah's family those touches of the culture we associate with the finest type of English gentleman. Shoghi Effendi himself detailed the purpose he had made in his studies in Oxford in a letter he wrote to a British believer on the 22nd of November, 1921, a week before the passing of Abdu'l-Bahá. You just listen to these words and then just really listen to Shoghi Effendi's mastery and his self-confidence. He's 24 years old. Listen to this. "I have been of late immersed in my work, revising many translations, and have sent to Mr. Hall my version of Queen Victoria's tablet, which is replete with the most vital and significant world counsels, so urgently needed by this sad and disillusioned world. If you have not perused it yet, be sure to obtain it from Mr. Hall, as it is, in my opinion, one of the most outstanding and emphatic pronouncements of Baha'u'llah on world affairs." And in a Persian letter addressed to one of his friends in London, Shoghi Effendi expresses satisfaction at his academic progress. "I am engaged in this land day and night in perfecting myself in the art of translation. I do not have a moment's rest. Thank God, to some extent, at least the results are good." I am, if you will forgive me, going to skip this story because it is another letter from Shoghi Effendi to a friend describing the tablet of Queen Victoria, which we have just described in another letter above. So I'm going to let you go to the chronology, and you can find this one in this section here, number 12, last term at Oxford. It's essentially the same, and it's quite long. This is now the last section of this part of the chronology, part 4, 1920, 1921. We're going to just review Shoghi Effendi's life in Oxford. And this is 13, if you want to go read some of the things I might skip. Cultured and refined friends. This is a very beautiful photograph of Shoghi Effendi in his 20s. One of Shoghi Effendi's goals in attending Oxford was to spend time with cultured and refined people. And he definitely made an unforgettable impression on the students who knew him. Shoghi Effendi stood out. They stood out. He stood out because among all his other friends who were probably going to become barristers or lawyers or doctors or professors, they knew that he was somehow destined to head the Baha'i faith. And that made his future remarkable compared to theirs. He was going to be the head of a religion or high up in the echelon of a religion, and they were going to be members of society or academia. Many people would describe Shoghi Effendi as unforgettable. Even in his college years, Shoghi Effendi was known for having this restless energy that Ruhiya Khanum describes so many times in Priceless Pearl. This energy, this curiosity, this eagerness, this perpetual motion, this immediacy that he had. He would never sit for long periods of time. He was friendly, he was easy to get along with, and he loved great conversations. One of Shoghi Effendi's classmates described him as being irrepressibly cheerful and energetic, bringing positive energies to any gathering. Shoghi Effendi was seen as quiet, but he was very quick-witted, very easy retort, and he was very informed, very educated, deeply so. Because his friends knew he was headed for a spiritual leadership of a religion, he earned the nickname God. People nickname Shoghi Effendi God or the God Kid. True, this is true. What you need to do, like after this talk, is you need to go and buy Prelude to the Guardianship by Riaz Khadem, and you need to read. This is very summarized. Riaz Khadem has written a masterpiece. You need to buy that book and read it cover to cover immediately. Shoghi Effendi loved to quote the great Persian poets Hafiz and Sadi, and he communicated his lifelong love to some of his friends in Oxford. His friends always knew that in Shoghi Effendi's room, there was always Russian caravan tea with cardamom seeds brewing. And so they knew they could always get that tea in Shoghi Effendi's room. So they often congregated in his room because of that amazing tea. Persians, I mean, tea. There are probably 20 stories about tea in my 4 chronologies combined. Tea and a tar of rose, people. Shoghi Effendi loved to have long conversation with his friends about ethical topics, social issues, historical facts and events. He even gave Persian cloth slippers to one of his friends, and the friend gave those slippers. He kept those slippers for years. Shoghi Effendi's determination in his studies. Remember at the beginning of this very long talk, I told you that I had a picture of the Bodleian Library when I showed you the inside of it. This is the outside of the Bodleian Library. Oh, sorry. Hold on. What am I doing? Got to do this. There you go. Shoghi Effendi was deeply committed to his aim to master the English language, to be of the most service possible to Abdu'l-Bahá. In Oxford, students were supervised by tutors. The tutors helped the students with their academic choices. What classes is he going to take this term? Their schedule, their studies, if they were struggling with a topic or things like that. Shoghi Effendi's tutor during his time at Balliol was A.D. Lindsay. A.D. Lindsay would become the master of Balliol College 3 years later, or 4 years later in 1924. In an informal conversation many years later, A.D. Lindsay shared the very particular type of passion that Shoghi Effendi had for his studies. And he said this: Shoghi Effendi's idea of education was to discover somebody whose opinions he valued and then question him. When Shoghi Effendi got his answers, he wrote them all in a small black book. Lifelong habit until the day he died. I had posted my schedule. Shoghi Effendi came to me asking, "What do you do between 7 and 8:30? Why, man," I cried, "I dine." "Oh," said Shoghi Effendi with obvious disappointment. "But must you have all that time?" I had not found so much eagerness for knowledge at Oxford. So I gave him another quarter hour and went with less dinner. So it was. I suffered for him. The dude needs an hour and a half to eat dinner. And then he calls giving Shoghi Effendi 15 minutes as sacrifice and suffering. I think this man had a very different life than a lot of people. I love this vignette. This is one of my favorite vignettes in this part. This is Shoghi Effendi's love of tennis. I did not put a caption on this, so I have no idea what this is. I think it's the Olympics. Sorry. I should check that there are captions on my photos. This is embarrassing. In the spring, Shoghi Effendi avidly played tennis, a sport he not only loved, but he was extremely good at. He played tennis with many adversaries in the masters field, and he was very, very talented. He played with high energy, and being ambidextrous, meaning right and left-handed, he could switch his racket flawlessly from his right to his left hand. He would hit volleys at the net. So in tennis, you can either play at the back of the field here, right? And you just hit long, broad strokes. But if you want to be aggressive, you can go right up to the net and you can just smash down any ball before it crosses the net. And Shoghi Effendi had an aggressive type of play. So he would hit volleys at the net, right up in the net, with tremendous speed. And he laughed while he played. He often hit unstoppable shots. And he served the ball from as far back as he could on the court, running through his serve with great energy. And although he was short, his serve was ferocious. So in tennis, another thing, I love tennis. So in tennis, another thing is that the taller you are, the more redoubtable, the more ferocious your serve is because you have height. So you're throwing the ball in the air and then you're smashing it down to serve. And so shorter tennis players have a disadvantage. But the thing with Shoghi Effendi is that although he was short, he would back up all the way as far back in the court as he possibly could, then hit the ball so hard that it didn't matter that he was short and he didn't have the extra height. His serves were kind of unstoppable. Most of his opponents would remember Shoghi Effendi as a very, very pleasant person to play tennis with. And he sometimes goaded players that he knew were very talented to get them to play tennis with him because he really liked having tennis matches with really good tennis players. And he really loved to have conversations with really good conversationalists. Shoghi Effendi and his love of the English language. Okay, I'm going to just make a disclaimer here and tell you that this is kind of my obsession. And I really gave into it in this chronology. You're going to be hearing about English and grammar and style and Shoghi Effendi's books and his love of English. Yeah, a lot. This is number 1 of like 10 probably. So these are the 6 volumes of The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. And this is the title page and the engraving of Gibbon from the 1777 third edition. I wasn't able to find a first edition. I like to use first editions when I do these collages, but I couldn't, so I failed, so I used a third edition. Shoghi Effendi was very, very methodical in his learning of English. Until the end of his life, he kept a habit that he picked up in Beirut, which was to write. Beirut as in Syrian Protestant college, as in the American University of Beirut. So his university studies, his undergrad, basically. Oxford was basically his second graduate degree because he already had a graduate degree from Syrian Protestant college. He loved English so much. Rahia Khanum said, for him, there was no second to English. And he spoke French fluently, which is widely regarded as one of the most beautiful languages in the world. But for him, there was no second to English. Shoghi Effendi was a great reader of the King James version of the Bible. Honestly, go to a Bible website. Read anything. Read anything. And then go to the King James version. You know, these Bible websites, they have like a million different Bibles, like the New English International one, the blah, blah, blah one. So look at how they translate and then look at the King James version and you're going to see the difference. The King James version is going to remind you of the writings of Baha'u'llah and gleanings from the writings of Baha'u'llah. It's that same sort of majesty that modern translators rebelled against and they translated the Bible more modern. King James Bible is majestic, Shakespearean, as is the history of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. That is the English that Shakespeare absolutely loved and which would completely just absorb him for the rest of his life. He would write for the rest of his life with that cadence, that elegance, that vocabulary, that never, ever, ever self-conscious about using a word that nobody knows. You just have to rise to the level of the Guardian. He is not going to lower his standard for you. Get a dictionary. Get the same dictionary as him, which is, I'm going to cover in God Passes By. My friends, this is the end of part 4. I'm going to click on this. This is part 5. This is what we're going to go next week. This is going to be a difficult section. It might be as long as this. This is the passing of Abdu'l-Bahá. Part 5, 1921, 1922, Shoghi Effendi becomes the Guardian. I have had a person tell me that Shoghi Effendi was always the Guardian. And this title of this part is Shoghi Effendi becomes the Guardian. I stand by my title because Shoghi Effendi will tell someone, the day I became the Guardian, I ceased to be a normal human being. So parts 1 through 4 are Shoghi Effendi as a normal human being. And part 5 is Shoghi Effendi becomes the Guardian. I will see you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. And now we're going to do questions.